Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. I am here with Larry Sabato from the Center of Politics over at University of Virginia, an expert in Virginia politics and really all politics. And we're really glad to have him tonight as we take a look at what just took place in Richmond, talking about that debate, the one and only for the Attorney General's race in the Commonwealth of Virginia between Democrat Jay Jones and Republican incumbent Jason Miyares. So let's get right to it. And by the way, we'll be taking your questions throughout this quick live stream. So feel free to message us, chime in any way you'd care to on YouTube or Facebook as we go through just a few highlights from the debate. And let's begin by talking about what really was the inevitable moment in this debate, and it didn't take long to get to. That was the fight over this text controversy that Jay Jones really seems to be mired in and can't escape at this moment. So talk to me, if you don't mind, Larry, about what you thought of how this played out, the prevalence that it had right off the top.
Sure. And I got to say, this was a much better debate than the one debate for governor that we saw just a few days ago. They were substantive, although obviously, as you suggest, Jay Jones's text dominated, certainly in the beginning. And Jason Miyares, appropriately, I think, kept bringing it up. That's his best issue right now, to separate himself from the other Republicans on the ticket. They may lose. He and his supporters and the Republican Attorney General's Association hope that he will be the one to win, even if the other two don't. Look, there's no way to explain them. There's no way to apologize for it. It always reminded me of somebody who's sorry because they got caught. I mean, that's generally the case with politicians. That was balanced on the other side by Donald Trump, who is consistently unpopular in Virginia. He lost all three elections for president here. And by the polls I've seen, he's still very low. He's 40, I think, at best in Virginia. So that's the debate that voters are going to have in their minds. Which most offends them? Those texts that Jay Jones sent, or Donald Trump, who Miyares is obviously close to and has not sued, as Jay Jones kept pointing out.
Yeah, I find it obviously inevitable. It was predictable. But you just referenced that gubernatorial debate where Winsome Earle-Sears, the lieutenant governor, almost at any opportunity interrupted Abigail Spanberger. In this case, it wasn't interruptions necessarily, but it was references too. So at any chance, it seemed like Jason Miyares was banking on the fact that if he kept bringing up these texts and if he related them to the audience by saying, how can this man care about children when he wanted children to die? How can he care about your need to overcome political division when he wanted to see a political opponent get two in the head? I feel like these days, these strategies, they might be one-trick ponies, but the candidates seem very married to them.
Oh, absolutely. Look, Miyares would have been guilty of political malpractice if he hadn't brought up the text at every turn. You know, the difference, as you note, with the gubernatorial debate was he didn't interrupt Jay Jones, and Jay Jones didn't interrupt him more than, I guess, one or two times. They paid attention to the rules of the debate, and the moderator congratulated them on that. It was just a much better debate because pretty much the candidates held to the rules. And that always helps the viewers to take in what the candidates are saying. But as I say, Miyares had to focus on that. That's his issue that separates him from the rest of the Republican ticket. And for all we know, they're all going to win. But probably the Democrats will carry governor, lieutenant governor. I don't have enough independent information to be able to judge that very much. But it is the attorney general's race that Republicans are hoping for and counting on. So that's why he brought it up. And, the texts are shocking. He was right to stick to the language of the text because they speak for themselves, unfortunately. It's just the kind of thing you don't expect to come from anyone, much less a candidate for attorney general, which the public associates with law, regulation, and enforcement.
Yeah, you mentioned that they kind of stuck to the rules, at least by a large comparison to the previous debate. And we have to remind our watchers and viewers here, that's because they're also attorneys. They knew how to keep their speak within time, and be relatively succinct when needed to be. What about the fact that, and again, we welcome any questions from our watchers and viewers tonight, but one of them that has already chimed in, Larry said, why does the Virginia Attorney General need to be involved in national politics? Remember, there was kind of back and forth about, are you caring more about Virginia or the nation? They said, shouldn't they be focused on Virginia? All I hear is Trump, 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 Trump. What do you make of that?
Well, I can see the argument the person's making, but the long-term tradition in Virginia has been that attorneys general, all of whom are running for governor. Let's be honest, they're running for governor at some point. They may serve 2 terms, they may serve 1 term, but normally they run for governor. So they're trying to get as much attention for their office and themselves as possible. And the headlines are much bigger when you go after a national fish, particularly the president. And I can remember even back in the late, the 1970s, really beginning in the 70s, attorneys general frequently joined with their colleagues, attorneys general in other states, to sue the president or some other national entity. So this is not really that unusual, though I think that's a reasonable observation. They should be focused on Virginia and not national. They do collect money that way, though. When they win these lawsuits, they often win, 10 million, 50 million, 100 million for Virginia. So, and then they can really brag about
it. And we did hear Jay Jones say that when he is attorney general, he plans to prosecute Trump. Back to your point, Larry, you talked about the unpopularity right now, President Trump underwater, obviously, in the Commonwealth, and he does have a favorability rating of only about 42%. I think it's 54 unfavorable in the latest polling. But also, this is a state that he lost 51 to 46, I believe, in the presidential election. So it is a popular tactic for Jay Jones to try and parallel the two as much as possible. What about other issues that you saw tonight, aside from this kind of persona back and forth? What did you see that you felt was a real difference maker that might stand out to a voter, if we still have some undecideds out there that were watching and trying to figure out where is it that they lay with tonight as this is my path forward to finding an attorney general that I feel most confident in?
Something that I've learned over the years in studying debates, and I've studied them since 1960. That shows you how old I am, with the 4 presidential debates in that year, Nixon, Kennedy. I've learned that people often grab onto personal details that they learn about the candidates. And a lot of times, those of us who are in the press or analysis business will dismiss their discussion about their family background or somebody who influenced them, or Miyares talking about his mother taking him out of Cuba. And I thought that was a nice touch, sending her a message in Spanish. But viewers actually relate to that and remember that. And if they make any kind of emotional connection with a candidate, they're more likely to vote for the candidate, unless they're a hard partisan. Look, the people watching these debates nowadays are pretty much decided voters. They're partisans. They care about politics. They care about citizenship. So they try and gather as much information as possible, or they love politics. But they already know for whom they're going to vote, or they've already voted. Our voting started at the end of September. Hundreds of thousands of people have already voted, and they may have seen something tonight that changed their mind, but I got news for them. They can't go to their local registrar and say, hey, I've changed my mind. Give me my vote back. Because the instant the vote was received at the registrar's office, the outer envelope was thrown away, and the inner envelope with the ballot was thrown in another pile. There's no way to give them another vote.
Yeah, and you point out very salient that there are hundreds of thousands who have already voted, a lot of them before this latest October surprise, if we're going to call it that, emerged to the degree that it did. Now, that doesn't mean anyone's going to necessarily regret their vote. A lot of people are partisan these days. They're voting down ballot for one party. And they may have said, look, he's still better than the other guy, so I'm okay with it. But it doesn't change the fact that we have reached kind of this odd point in Commonwealth races, at least, where you have three, all of which have seen just such tumult and such criticism that I've heard from a lot of voters who don't like any of the six options in any of the three races and aren't thrilled with this, even though this attention is pretty significant. I mean, it's what you've got: New Jersey, you've got Virginia, not much else going on right now. What do you make of the fact that today we finally saw President Obama endorse Abigail Spanberger? We have not seen President Trump endorse Winsome Earl Sears. These races are interesting, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. And of course, there's a strategy, I think, behind both of those endorsements. For Obama, this has been long scheduled and expected. I have been a little surprised that Trump didn't just endorse the whole Republican ticket. But you see, he's been told, I think correctly, that Miyares has the best chance to win on the ticket. And we all know Donald Trump likes to be associated with winners, not losers. I'm not predicting that the other two will lose. They may very well win in the end. You just never know. Politics is a crazy business. But I think that's why. But, at some point, it probably is better off for a president, any president, to go ahead and get it out of the way. In fact, the earlier the better. It's almost too late to bring it up because it would be a headline for 2 or 3 days if Trump actually endorsed Winsome Earl Sears. But he has endorsed Miyares. He likes Miyares. He's had him at rallies. And, look, Miyares will take that because it helps the Republican base to turn out. Early in this race, Republicans were having a hard time turning on their base. They weren't that excited about the ticket. They may have liked Miyares, but I don't think they were that excited for various reasons about the other candidates. Well, I think they're getting more excited because of the J. Jones stuff. And probably for other factors. Look, Trump has probably gone up a few points because of what happened in the Middle East. I've been waiting for new polling to show us that. And the traditional polls here that are reliable haven't come out. I hope somebody's planning some additional polls between now and November 4th. And I think they will. I've heard there are a couple in the field.
Is it all this line of attack by Jason Miyares that Jay Jones hasn't prosecuted cases before? Does the voter care a lot about that? Or is it more about that combination of this person represents the party I typically align with, and I do find appeal in their personal story? I mean, Jay Jones multiple times mentioned, look, I'm a descendant of slaves. My family has overcome great grievances to get to this point where now I've been a delegate. I've worked in the DC office as an attorney. I'm here as someone who represents the best aspirations of all of us. Is that more important these days than a resume?
Well, a resume is by definition dry and interesting only to an admissions officer. Nothing wrong with that. But I don't think that really sways many voters. It is mainly party ID. People have a hard time believing this because every year Gallup comes out with a survey saying that 44% of Americans are independents and only 28% are Democrats and 28% are Republicans. That's malarkey. The vast majority of independents have a hidden partisanship, and they vote for their party at the same rate as people who openly declare themselves to be Democrats and Republicans. And really, it's over 90% of people know which party they identify with, and they almost always stick with it. That's why I'm looking at the Attorney General's race in particular, because if there's an exception, it would be that particular race. It would, and on election night, I want to see immediately how the votes are lining up for governor versus lieutenant governor versus attorney general, because I'll be surprised if Miyares doesn't have the highest percentage, whatever the percentage is for governor and lieutenant governor. Look, there's one other factor too that people never think about. It's called ballot drop off, ballot fall off. It's not about turnout. This is about the people who actually vote. And again, this is incredible when you think about it. People vote for governor, almost everyone. You'll have 99% of the people who turn out vote for governor. And then for lieutenant governor, it'll fall down to, 95%. And then attorney general, there are only 3 statewide positions. Attorney general, it can go to the low 90s, and occasionally you see it in the 80s. these people take the trouble to go to the polls and then they don't vote in all the races. They just vote for governor and leave, which is ridiculous. They ought to stay there the extra minute or two and finish filling out the ballot. But the more excited you can get about a candidate further down on the ballot, the more likely it is that you're going to complete the ballot. And so that's something that both of these candidates have to consider, because obviously Jones wants to hang on to the coattails that may be generated by Spanberger, and Miyares actually wants to get some of the votes Spanberger is getting. I don't know if you've noticed the new ad that's out from Miyares that says, hey, if you're voting for Spanberger, consider voting a Spanberger-Miyares ticket. That's a pretty overt appeal to bipartisanship, I guess you could say.
Politics makes strange bedfellows. Larry Sabato here from the Center for Politics at University of Virginia with Crystal Ball, longtime expert here on politics, all things, but especially Virginia as well. We want to take any more of your questions. We've got a few minutes left here with him, and we have one that just came in. Professor, should debates take place in September before early voting? Great question.
Oh, I absolutely agree. I've urged this. No one listens to me. No one should. You know, I'm just too old to pay much attention to. But we need to have at least one debate before voting begins. Preferably, I think, 2 debates. And I'd like to have 2 during the voting process, because there are most of the people have not voted even by almost the middle of October. You have an increase in voting almost day by day in late October leading up to the November election, in this case, November 4th. So I think the individual who asked that question is absolutely correct. Why don't we have them? Because the candidates don't want to do them. Look, I moderated a lot of the debates between the 1980s and the first decade of this century, the TV debates. And we worked with the candidates starting in the spring, or certainly right after they were nominated. And they normally always agreed to at least 3 debates, and sometimes more than 3. And now, if you can get them to agree to 1 debate, you're lucky. I don't think there's been a single debate for lieutenant governor. Maybe I missed something, but I don't think they've debated at all. 1 for governor, 1 for attorney general. No, there ought to be more than that. But I'm old fashioned.
No, it's become really problematic. We, among probably every media organization in the Commonwealth, has made requests to host debates, and we've had on one occasion in this race where one candidate said yes, they'd be willing to do it, the other did not. And even then, you begin this negotiating process, right? Well, okay, well, what if we just do a forum and one of you sits for 10 minutes and the other does? We take some audience questions, or we come up with some. I feel like everyone's kind of running scared. The candidates don't want to be put in a position where that bite isn't the one they wanted. It goes viral and they feel like it's done damage control. Or if they're ahead in the polls, they say, why need to stick our head out of a foxhole, right? Just like keep running that momentum.
The front runner never wants to debate. But I'll tell you another factor that's made it more difficult to get these candidates to debate. The Joe Biden disaster at the end of June 2024 that ended his presidency and candidacy. And you see candidates look at that and say, oh my God, if I'm sick that day or I make a terrible mistake during the debate, all this work I put in for years and years goes up in smoke. Well, you know what? It's called politics. And, if you're going to run for high office and have all that power and all those perks, you ought to appear on the debate stage 3 or 4 times.
Well, and Professor, I mean, I've said before, because there have been times where, I guess I've seen my share of these races as well now at this point, 30 years in. And there have been times where candidates will push back quite passionately against a question. And I've always said, big boy questions for big boy politicians. I mean, you have to be able to answer these things when you're trying to account for millions of voters and residents who want to know. It doesn't mean that you're coming from a position of left or right, or there's a slant attached to a question. Sometimes it's just a question that you need to be accountable enough to answer so that people can get to know you beyond the campaign ads or the mudslinging against an opponent. Last thing for you, Larry, anything else that you think either A, really stood out tonight that you think is noteworthy, or B, that you think between now and election day, which that window is tightening pretty quickly, is going to be another X factor that might make a difference?
Well, I can predict this easily, and anybody listening can predict it. For Jay Jones, his TV guys are going to splice together all the Donald Trump segments. You know, they'll condense them, but you'll have various Donald Trump questions and answers, but mainly questions attacking Miyares. And Miyares is going to splice together all of the unanswered attacks generally about his texts. And that's the way it is. Most TV ads, especially in the final weeks of a campaign, turn hard negative. And, you know, none of us like them, but they actually do influence who turns out to vote, not just for whom they vote, but who turns out to vote.
We've got one more quick one. We've got a late question here for you. Is Donald Trump the issue on each ballot in the country for the foreseeable future? Great question.
Probably. I couldn't say definitely because you never know what's going to happen, but probably he has a very strong personality, and that's the understatement of the 21st century. So people on both sides look to Trump either to know what he thinks and how to vote, or to know what he thinks so they'll know who not to vote for. And that's just the way it is. It doesn't work that way with all presidents. You know, Joe Biden hurt Democrats for sure in the 2021 elections in both New Jersey and Virginia, but I don't think he drove the vote the way Donald Trump did, say, in 2017 when Democrats swept the elections in Virginia the year after Trump was elected. And this is true with other presidents. Obama had a tremendous impact, mainly negative, in his sixth year election, his second term midterm. That was a disaster for Democrats. It was a disaster for Republicans in George W. Bush's second term midterm. So you do look to presidents. People have strong opinions about them, but they have really strong opinions about Donald Trump. And he does drive a lot of the vote, pro and con.
As I say thank you and goodbye, one last opportunity for you. Do you have a prediction at this point for this or any of the three races?
Not quite yet. We're working on it. I think it's obvious to most people how things are going, but you know, things can change. You can have new issues arise. You can have additional texts released. You just never know what's going to happen tomorrow. And they don't really give you any warning about this, which I'm very offended by. They really ought to tell us in advance. Don't you agree?
I agree with that wholeheartedly, my friend. Hey, listen, Larry Sabato from the Center for Politics at the University of Virginia, always generous with his time as he is tonight. Thank you for being here. Thank you for those of you who are tuning in and provided us with some very thoughtful questions. We'll continue to cover these three races exhaustively between now and Election Day. Make sure you join us at WJLA.com and, of course, on air every evening as we break down the latest in politics in these critical three races across the Commonwealth. Thanks and have a good night, everyone. Thank you, Larry.